Welcome into the first edition of the MizzouToday Show on 3 and Rivals. I'm your host, Kenny Van Doren, here with Kyle McAreavy, the senior editor of Mizzou Today. Kyle, it's the first time doing this together. People are actually getting the first look at us for those that haven't looked back on the YouTube before, just back in the original just Rivals and Yahoo Sports days. But you're getting into the back end of fall camp now for Mizzou football. We're going to get right into it right away. We don't want to bury the lead. I mean, everyone wants to hear about the quarterback battle. I know they were pretty much neck and neck. No one was really taking that step forward, according to Coach Eli Drinkwitz. Can you kind of give us, where it kind of stands with the quarterback battle now? And I mean, your thoughts on where it goes from here?
Yeah, I think right now I would lean toward Beau Pribula just because of some whispers we've heard about, kind of background stuff. Drinkwitz has been very sure to say it's all, just about even. Nobody's really taken that step forward to take the lead, really. And some media did get to see the second scrimmage that the Tigers had back last weekend. And honestly, the two of them both had some good moments, both had some bad moments. Drinkwitz pointed out that there were no turnovers, so he was pretty happy with that at that point. But they both had moments where the offense really stalled, didn't do a lot. And then I think the best moment was Pribula's game-ending 70-second drive to finish up the scrimmage. He led a touchdown drive right at the end. I would say that was the highlight of the day, and that's part of why I think it's probably leaning toward Pribula at this point.
And when you watched him in that scrimmage, I know a lot of guys got to see it. More of some of the closer media members over to the team right now in fall camp. What were some of the strengths and maybe some weaknesses? You talk about the highs and lows there. What are some things that maybe Pribula does well that Sam Horn doesn't do well? Maybe where Sam Horn kind of has an edge, and how do you see that kind of going into the offense for whichever quarterback they choose?
Yeah, Sam definitely is a more confident pocket passer. He was staying in the pocket, even though there was a good bit of pressure coming from the defensive line. I thought the defensive line was a big standout that day, kind of as a whole. But Horn was staying in the pocket, getting his throws off, kind of doing a good job from that space. Pribula looks very confident on the run and was moving around intentionally a lot of the time. So when I say, he was escaping the pocket pretty much every play, it's not because he was running for his life every play, even though there was a good bit of pressure. It was that he intentionally wanted to change the view and, is athletic enough and sure enough in his ability to extend plays that way that he looked very good, getting out of the pocket, moving around, and then getting a throw off.
And maybe in part to that defensive line playing really well was the offensive line being a little puzzled together. Not many of the guys who were starters were in that scrimmage, or some of the guys that are projected to start for that offensive line. So let's talk about the offensive line competition this week. Total, mashup of different guys. Caden Green moves out to left tackle. Can you kind of walk us through some of those changes? And I mean, what's the trajectory of some of these changes actually happening, and who's really going to stick at those positions come week one?
Yeah, so I guess the best way to do that is kind of run through what the expectation was kind of going into that scrimmage, which was a left tackle competition between Javen Richardson and Johnny Williams. Caden Green solidified at left guard, Connor Tollison at center, battle at right guard that I, up to the scrimmage, was pretty sure that Dominic Gidich is, I believe, how you pronounce it. He did tell us in media, and I think that's right. And then Keegan Trost at right tackle. And since then, I know the word got around a little bit that Drinkwitz said afterward that there would be some changes. And we got back out to practice on Monday, and Caden Green was lined up at left tackle. And that's a pretty big change. It had been asked about to Caden directly in spring ball, to offensive line coach Brandon Jones, to Drinkwitz at times just over the last 6 months. And it was always kind of pushed away, not necessarily disregarded, but, as kind of an offhand idea, like, oh, we could do that. Caden's capable of doing that, but that's not the plan. And I guess now there's enough worry about both Richardson and Williams at left tackle that the idea of putting Green out there became the more attractive option, which then has moved Gidich to left guard and Curtis Piggler into the main spot at right guard.
Curtis Piggler has been a name, like even going back to when I was in college. For those who don't know, I graduated from Mizzou in 2023. So my last football season was 2022. Heard his name even then. What just about, Curtis Piggler, he got to talk to the media, really stood out in those conversations with him. And from what, the staff said too, that really pushed him into that competition and pushed him into a spot this late into camp.
Well, he was on the 2 deep at right guard last year. I think the expectation was he was part of the right guard competition, going into camp before Gadich really seemingly took control of that spot early on. He's kind of a quieter guy than I expected after media got to speak with him the other day. But very excited about the opportunity, and he's a big, strong kid. I mean, I think he's certainly got the body to hold up in the spot, and he does have at least a handful of snaps here and there across last year to kind of get a little bit of experience in the spot.
He's a returning player that's taken a step forward. But who else has, maybe on the defensive line, maybe there's some defensive tackles expected to take a step forward. You lose 2 star wide receivers in Theo Weiss and Luther Burden, who's stepping up in that room. Just from what you've seen on offensive and defensive side of the ball, who are some guys that have really taken that step forward in becoming more of a primary option this year?
The defensive standout for me during the scrimmage, especially, was Marquise Gracial. He got mentioned by Drinkwitz in the post-scrimmage media scrum. Drinkwitz brought him up earlier last week when I asked about, who's really jumped out to him specifically. That Gracial was the first name he brought up. And, he was all over the place during the scrimmage. He was in the backfield and taking reps with the ones, which was kind of a surprise to me. Coming into camp, I kind of figured he would be the 3rd or 4th defensive tackle in the room behind Chris McClellan, Sterling Webb, and competing with Braylon Henderson for that 3rd, 4th spot. It looks like Graciel's stepped up, maybe even into the 2 spot. He's definitely a very different body than Sterling Webb. They serve different purposes at the defensive tackle position. So I could see kind of a rotation there, just depending on what the staff thinks they need on the defensive line at the start of games. But he's been a major, major standout on the defensive side. Offensively, you mentioned the receivers that are gone. Joshua Manning's been a big, big step-up guy. And, of course, Marquise Johnson. I think everybody's excited to see what he can do when given the opportunity to play a bigger role in the offense versus just a take the top off the defense type of guy like he has been the last couple of years.
I want to talk about the secondary too. Maybe some guys expected to step up. Only one transfer coming in at the cornerback position, Stephen Hall from Washington State. But, some of those guys really didn't maybe have the years that they were expecting last year. Toriano Pride transferring over from Clemson. Nick DeLoach really took a step forward in that room, but still had, his ups and downs at times. Drayden Norwood, entering, crazy to think, his final year at Mizzou this year. What have you kind of seen just from them and maybe Toriano Pride specifically?
So Toriano specifically, he stood out during the scrimmage too, just kind of was a force along the outside, and got asked about afterward to Drinkwitz. And the explanation from Drinkwitz was that he's got his confidence back. There were some moments kind of like week 4, week 5-ish last year, Vanderbilt and Texas A&M specifically, that kind of shook his confidence a bit. He came in with high expectations, was a highly ranked transfer coming home, and struggled early. Had some specific plays that really he got burned, and it didn't look very good. And throughout the season, he did get better. He kind of got that back, but through this offseason, really has seemed to get the full confidence back. And I think if he's out there playing confident, he's going to be a fantastic corner this year.
That secondary has a load of transfers coming in. Jalen Catalon being one of the big ones. A lot of people know just from his time in the SEC specifically. There's also some guys on the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned it with Dominic Judice and Kevin Coleman at the wide receiver spot. Who have been some big camp standouts from what you've been able to see in practice and the scrimmage, and just from what the staff and some of the players have said in interviews?
Well, you brought up Catalon. He's been a big one. He gets brought up a lot as a leadership guy He's got all the experience you're allowed to have in college football and more nowadays. Now that we're past all the COVID years, hopefully. He's just been a guy who jumped right in and was able to, immediately lead the way. He was a new guy coming in January and was already getting shouted out for his leadership because he's just been around so much and experienced so much on the football field. And I think there was a specific quote from Drinkwitz when he got asked about him a week or two ago that was, we tried to run a reverse on the goal line and he'd seen the play 15 times in his career. He's just seen everything. So he's really been a standout. He's almost certainly locked up, one of the starting safety positions alongside most likely Marvin Burks and then, of course, Dalen Carnell.
And what about the opposite side of the ball? I know you talked about Jadice there, but anyone else just really on the offensive side of the ball really standing out to you, maybe just in the wide receiver spot? Ahmad Hardy is the talk of the town at running back, as he should be. Anyone else just on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, so Kevin Coleman is definitely a big one. I don't think that's really a surprise. He was third team All SEC last year, I think, at Mississippi State. And he's in Columbia to be the number one receiver. He's going to be the main guy in the room. He's going to take that slot position that Luther Burden filled the last couple of years. And, he's everything you want him to be at this point. The other receivers in the room are talking about him also as a leadership guy, just coming in and getting the work done. And talent-wise, off the charts. I mean, it's crazy watching him out there. And then, like you mentioned with Hardy, Drink was mentioned after the scrimmage. He held Hardy out because he showed him during the first scrimmage that the defense didn't need to try to tackle him live. He is everything that 1,300 yards last year. He's everything you could hope for as the leader in the backfield this year.
Yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite parts that you got from that scrimmage was when that was asked. I want to get into this last question, and as the recruiting editor, is probably the most exciting one for me because I covered a handful of these guys last year before we merged over with On3 and before the season started. But the freshmen who are standing out, I know Marquise Davis is just the talk of the town too at running back, just right behind Ahmad Hardy with how physically developed he is, how strong he's been. But who else? Just among the freshmen, Donovan Alubade is one that's come to mind. Saw a highlight of Demarion Folks and just his ability to jump up and catch that ball today in practice. Who's just been standing out just among the freshmen?
The big one for me is Davis. I mean, just physically, you could mistake him for a redshirt senior who's been working with a college strength coach for 4 years. He is as built as I've ever seen an 18-year-old. I mean, it's crazy. Alubade has been great. There was a little bit of an issue, maybe a call out from Drinkwitz that he needed to get better at catching balls in traffic. But expectations are high for him. I think there's a moderate chance that he becomes, a legitimate receiving option this season as a true freshman. And then, Sean Terry and Demarion Folks both look great. Folks' speed really jumps out. I know you've written about it before, and he stayed home instead of early enrolling to help his high school win the 4x100 in the state track meet, I think. It'll play. I mean, that speed will work at the SEC level. I don't know, how much he's going to really get in this year. Same with Terry. I could see some special teams roles for both of them for sure. But, as a receiver, there's just a lot going on in the room ahead of them.
Yeah, I'm very excited for our old rivals content to finally be visible again once everything is fully merged, because there's some good stories. It was a good story I felt that Demarion Folks' high school coach told me they just loved him as a punt returner too. They pointed it out a bunch. And so I think that would be a good thing. And I like what you mentioned. Both those guys probably have enough speed, enough kind of elusiveness to contribute on special teams a little bit sooner and probably in that little bit more of a deeper wide receiver room. Kyle, we're a little bit over 2 weeks away from the start of the season. I mean, just kind of give the people what the rest of fall camp looks like, maybe some more practices are coming along and some of those final availabilities before captains are announced.
Yeah, so this weekend is the scrimmage. It's more of a walkthrough that got talked about. That's going to be at Lindenwood to simulate a road game. So I think the team is going to go stay in a hotel one night, work on, the routine in the morning of getting up, getting off the bus, going through walkthroughs and all of that on the road, just to get a little bit of that experience, since you won't get it for the first month and a half of the season. And then the team will be back in town starting, early next week. We've got, I think, 2 or 3 available practices left to view. 1 more player availability, so probably 4 or 5 more interviews there. And then a big wrap up from Coach Drinkwitz and the captains on, I believe, next Thursday.
Any guesses on the captains? I feel like some of them might be, alluded to with the decisions on who went to SEC Media Days. Zion Young has been a pretty vocal voice. Dalen Carnell is another one. Anyone you think that'll be among those captains?
Yeah, I think the guys who went to Media Days is probably the right call. Connor Tollison, Zion Young, Dalen Carnell. I mean, with Connor and Dalen especially, they've been such key parts of the team for 3-4 years now. And then Zion has really taken on a leadership role in that defensive end group as the kind of main returning guy in there. And yeah, I think those 3 are probably a pretty good guess.
Well, that's going to do it for our fall camp update. First episode, MizzouToday Show with On 3 and Rivals. That's Kyle McAreavy, senior editor for Mizzou Today. You can find him on Twitter at Kyle_McAreavy, or X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm the recruiting editor, Kenny Van Doren. You can find me on Twitter at The Vandalorian. We will see you guys next time.